My hip was giving me trouble that morning, the way it always does when the weather turns cold, but I still drove the 40 minutes to her apartment. That's what I did every first of the month. Had done it for 3 years. I'd park in the same spot in the visitor lot, walk the same path past the mailboxes, knock twice the way I always did. She'd open the door just wide enough to take the envelope, never invited me in. I told myself she was grieving. I told myself some people need space. I told myself a lot of things in those 3 years. My son died on a Tuesday in February. A gas leak at the distribution warehouse where he'd worked for 11 years. They said he likely didn't suffer. They say that to everyone. I don't know if it's true, and I stopped trying to find out. He was 41 years old. He coached Little League on Saturday mornings. He called me every Sunday night without fail, usually around 7, usually while he was washing the dinner dishes. I know that because I could always hear the water running in the background. When he died, he left behind a wife and a daughter who had just turned 7. The little girl had his eyes, still does as far as I know. I'm 64, retired 2 years ago after 30 years with the county assessor's office. Not a glamorous career, but it was steady and it was honest, and I was good at it. My wife passed 8 years ago, ovarian cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end. After that it was just me and my son, and then just me and him and his family, and then after that Tuesday in February, just me. The envelope I brought every month had $1,500 in it. Cash. My son had a small life insurance policy, but it barely covered the funeral. He hadn't updated his will after his daughter was born. There were credit card debts I didn't know about. His wife part-time at a dental office, but with a 7-year-old at home full-time, wasn't easy. I did the math, and $1,500 felt like the right number. It was roughly a quarter of my monthly pension. I could manage. I want to be clear about something. I didn't do it to be thanked. I didn't do it because I felt obligated. I did it because that little girl with my son's eyes deserved stability, and because when you're 62 years old and your son is gone, and you're trying to figure out what your life is for now, sometimes the answer is just keep showing up. So I kept showing up. First of every month, 40 minutes there, 40 minutes back. The neighbor's name was Irene. She lived 2 doors down from my daughter-in-law's apartment, and she had one of those small dogs that's always trembling, like it's perpetually cold. I'd seen her a handful of times over the 3 years, said hello, held the lobby door, the way you do. It was October, almost exactly 3 years to the month after my son's funeral, when she stopped me on my way back to the elevator. "Excuse me," she said. She had a careful look on her face. Not nosy, careful, there's a difference. You come every month, don't you? You're her father-in-law?" I said I was. She looked at the envelope still in my hand. I'd knocked and knocked that morning and gotten no answer. It was the first time in 3 years that nobody had come to the door. I'd finally slipped the envelope under the door and was heading out. "I don't want to cause any trouble," she said. I told her she wasn't causing anything. She looked at her dog for a moment, then back at me. "I don't think she's been home much lately. I've been feeding her cat through the mail slot when she asks, but lately she hasn't asked. And there's been a man," she paused, "coming and going at odd hours. He doesn't look like a visitor." I thanked her. I told her I appreciated her saying something. I walked back to my car and sat there for a long time. I didn't drive home right away. I want to say I immediately felt something was wrong, that some father's instinct fired in my chest and told me to pay attention. But honestly, my first thought was relief. My daughter-in-law was 38 years old. She'd been alone for 3 years. The idea that she had company didn't alarm me. People move on. They should. But then I thought about the door. 3 years, and she'd always answered, even when she looked tired, even when she'd clearly been crying. Even that one time there was a stomach bug going through the apartment, and she'd open the door in a bathrobe. She always answered. I thought about the cat being fed through the mail slot. I sat in the parking lot for almost an hour. I came back the following Saturday morning. Not on the first of the month, not with an envelope. I just came back. I parked across the street at a coffee shop that had a direct line of sight to her building's entrance. I ordered a large coffee and a blueberry muffin, and I sat by the window and I felt like an idiot. I was 63 years old, sitting in a coffee shop staking out my daughter-in-law's building like something out of a cable television drama. My hip hurt. The coffee was too hot. I sat there for 2 hours. Nothing. I came back Sunday. Different time, late afternoon. I ordered tea that time and read 3 weeks of unread newspaper on my phone. Just before 5 o'clock, she came out of the building. She was dressed nicely, she had luggage. Not a weekend bag, not a carry-on. 2 large rolling suitcases and a duffel over her shoulder. A man came out behind her carrying another bag. He held the door and said something that made her laugh. I watched them load everything into a silver SUV I'd never seen before. He drove. They turned left out of the parking lot, and I didn't follow them. I didn't need to. I just sat there with my tea going cold and the newspaper open on my phone, and I watched the space where that silver SUV had been. I need to tell you what my son was like because it matters. He was not a complicated man. That's not an insult. I mean, he was clear. He said what he meant. When he was proud of you, you knew it. When he was disappointed, you knew that too. He had a firm handshake, and he looked people in the eye, and he remembered details about their lives. Their kids' names, their health stuff, whether their mom had gotten the hip replacement. He'd ask about it 3 months later because he'd written it down somewhere. People loved him for that. He was also stubborn and occasionally wrong, and there were a couple of years in his late 20s when we didn't talk much. Over something I no longer remember the specifics of. We got past it. We had Sunday phone calls for the last 9 years of his life. I am more grateful for those calls than I know how to say. He met his wife when they were both 32. She seemed steady, seemed warm. She made a green bean casserole at Christmas that my son talked about for weeks. I liked her. I still thought I liked her, sitting in that coffee shop, watching the space where her car had been, which maybe tells you something about how long it takes for things to actually land. The following week I made some calls. I have a friend, a retired investigator from the county sheriff's department. One of those men who has never fully retired in his own mind. He still keeps his contacts. He still knows people who know things. I told him what I'd seen and what I was afraid of, which was not what you might expect. I wasn't afraid she'd met someone. I wasn't afraid she was moving on. I was afraid about my granddaughter, who was 10 by then, who I saw at Christmas and on her birthday, and who called me grandpa and drew pictures of us in crayon that I still have on my refrigerator. Where was she? She hadn't been with her mother when they loaded those suitcases. The little girl with my son's eyes. My friend made some calls. It took him about 4 days. He called me on a Thursday morning and he said, "You need to sit down." I was already sitting. I told him so. "Her ex-husband's name isn't on a death certificate," he said. "Not in this county. Not in the neighboring counties. He was listed as deceased in the company's internal records after the accident, but the official investigation was closed without a confirmed body. The warehouse fire was. The official report lists the cause as undetermined ignition source, and the remains found were." He stopped. There's a lot of ambiguity in the language. I asked him to say plainly what he was telling me. "It's possible," he said carefully, "that your son walked away." The room was very quiet after that. I want to tell you what it feels like to hear something like that. I want to describe it accurately because I think it matters that you understand. It doesn't feel like anything at first. That's the strange part. You'd expect rage, or grief reopened, or something seismic. Instead, there was just a strange emptiness, like the floor had turned to something that wasn't quite solid without actually giving way under you. I sat there with my phone to my ear, and I looked at the coffee mug on my kitchen table and I thought, he bought me that mug 3 Christmases ago. It says, "World's okayest dad," and we both thought that was funnier than it probably is. I asked my friend to keep going. The man my daughter-in-law had been seen with was using a name I didn't recognize. He had a new address in a different state, several hours away. He'd made a payment on a vehicle 6 weeks ago. The description matched the silver SUV. There was $70,000 that had moved through an account I'd never heard of, about 2 months after the funeral. The origin was unclear. My friend suspected it came from somewhere my son had been quietly putting money for a long time. He'd been planning this. He had been planning this. My son, who looked people in the eye and remembered the names of their kids and made Sunday phone calls and coached Little League, had been planning this for what must have been years. I drove out to see my daughter-in-law. I used that phrase out of habit. She was not my daughter-in-law anymore in any real sense. She was, as it turned out, a woman who had helped my son disappear and then accepted $1,500 a month from me for 3 years to help maintain the illusion that she was a widow raising a child alone. I need to tell you about the child. My granddaughter was not with her mother. She was with my daughter-in-law's sister, 2 states over, had been for several months. School transfer, the sister had said when I called. Family circumstances. She was fine. She was healthy. She didn't know the full shape of what had happened. Children often don't. When I got to the apartment, a different one now, a new building, I'd gotten the address from my friend. I knocked on the door and I waited. She answered. She looked at me the way you look at someone you hoped might never appear at your door again. I'm not angry, I said, which was not entirely true but was the truest thing I could think to start with. I'd like to come in. She stepped back and let me in. The apartment was half-packed, boxes along one wall, a few framed photos still on the shelf. I sat in a chair that didn't belong there yet, the kind of chair that's still figuring out where it lives in a new space. I asked her to tell me the truth. I told her I already knew most of it. I told her what I knew. She didn't deny anything. What she told me in the next 40 minutes was this. My son had gotten into debt. Not the manageable credit card kind, but the kind that involves people who are not from banks, people who don't send politely worded statements. The kind where the interest compounds in ways that have nothing to do with percentages and everything to do with what you stand to lose. He had borrowed to try to fix a problem he'd made worse over several years, a problem she had not known the full scope of until it was very late. The warehouse accident had given him an opportunity. She had helped him take it because she was frightened, and because he had told her the only other option was worse for all of them. She cried when she said that. I believed her, mostly. I'm not sure it matters. I asked where he was. She gave me an address. Then she said, he doesn't know I'm giving you that. He thinks you'll never know. I nodded. The money, I said. The $1,500 a month. She was quiet. My granddaughter, I said. She's fine, she said quickly. She's safe. She's with my sister and she's in school and she's fine. That's not what I asked. She looked at her hands. She thinks her father is dead. She was 7. We couldn't. She stopped. I don't know how to fix that part. I looked at the photos still on the shelf. My granddaughter at what looked like a birthday party, grinning with a frosting-covered spoon. My son wasn't in any of them. I stood up to leave. What are you going to do? She asked. I thought about it. I'm going to think, I said. I drove for a long time before I used the address. I've spent a lot of years doing paperwork, property assessments, county records, the fine and tedious architecture of official documentation. I understand better than most people what it means to build a paper life, what it takes, what it costs, what it leaves behind. My son had built a paper death. That's the only way I know how to describe it. He had looked at his life and the debt inside it, and the people coming to collect on that debt, and he had chosen to end that particular version of himself and start another one somewhere else. He had made his wife complicit. He had made his daughter an orphan while he was still breathing, and he had let me grieve. That's the one I keep coming back to. Not the money, though the money is not nothing. Not the fraud, though it is fraud. Whatever I decided to do about it. The thing I keep coming back to is Sunday nights at 7 o'clock. The sound of the water running while he washed the dishes. The phone calls I had with a man who was already planning how to disappear from my life. Whether any of it was real, I think most of it was. I have to believe that or the math doesn't work at all. The address was a small house in a town I'd never been to, 340 miles from where I live. I drove straight there. I didn't stop except for gas and a coffee I barely drank. I parked on the street. I sat there for a long time, the way I'd sat in the coffee shop. The way I'd been sitting in parking lots for weeks now, it felt like. Looking at houses and spaces and trying to understand what I was about to do. There was a truck in the driveway. A porch light on even in the middle of the afternoon. A garden in the front yard that someone was tending, the kind of careful garden that takes real attention. Marigolds along the front, tomato cages near the side of the house. I noticed it because my wife used to grow tomatoes. He came outside while I was sitting there. He must have seen my car. He was dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt, and his hair was a little longer than I remembered, and there was a beard, the kind that wasn't there before. He stood on his porch and he looked at my car, and I could see the moment he recognized it. He didn't run. That surprised me, honestly. I'd half expected him to run. Instead, he walked down the porch steps across the yard and stood at the passenger side of my car. I unlocked the door. He got in. We sat there together for a long time without saying anything. He was the one who spoke first. "Dad," he said, "it is a very strange thing to hear that word from a man you have been mourning for 3 years. I want to be precise about what it does to you. It does not feel like relief. Not at first. It feels like a seam opening in something you'd thought was healed. All the work you did, all the accommodation you made to the shape of the world without him in it, it tears just slightly. Not in a good way, not in a bad way, just in a real way." I let the silence sit there between us for another minute. Then I told him what I knew. I told him about the 3 years of envelopes and the parking lot and the Sunday nights I'd spent some months just sitting in my kitchen at 7 o'clock out of habit, not expecting the phone to ring, just sitting there. I told him about his daughter. I told him what it looked like on her face at Christmas when I told her, again, that her father was a good man who loved her. He didn't say anything for a long time. When he did speak, he told me what his mother had told me in rough form: the debt, the people, the accumulation of bad years and worse decisions. He told me details she hadn't known. He told me how afraid he had been. I sat there and I listened to all of it. Here is what I did not do. I did not tell him I understood. I did not tell him it was okay, I said. "You have a daughter," he said. "I know. She draws pictures," I said. "She puts them on her refrigerator at her aunt's house now. She drew one of me last Christmas. I'm very tall in it and my hair is the wrong color, but she got the nose right." He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite crying, something in between. "You have to decide what you're going to do," I said. "I'm not going to decide it for you, and I'm not going to threaten you. You're not 20 years old. You know what a life costs and what it's worth and what you lose when you throw one away. You know better than I do now." I looked at the garden he'd made in his front yard. Those careful rows, the marigolds. "But you have a daughter," I said again, "and you have a father, and whatever you decide to do with that information, you won't be able to say nobody told you." I got out of the car. He didn't call after me. I didn't expect him to. Some things take time to work on a person. I've learned that 64 years in. I drove home in the dark. My hip ached from the long drive. I stopped at a rest stop somewhere past the state line and walked around the parking lot a few times, which my doctor tells me to do, which I mostly ignore. That night I did it. I thought about my wife. I thought about the 14 months we had from her diagnosis to the end, how we had not wasted a single one of them in anger or silence. I thought about what she would say if I described this particular Tuesday in her husband's life to her. I think she would say I did all right. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if my son will make the phone call he needs to make, or have the conversation with his daughter that can never be fully undone, or come to terms with the shape of the life he's made. I don't know if the people he was running from are still looking for him, or have long since moved on to other problems. I don't know if what he built in that small town with the careful garden is real or just another version of the paper life he's been constructing for years. What I know is that I drove 40 minutes every first of the month for 3 years, and every one of those trips was real. What I know is that the phone calls on Sunday night were real, the water running in the background, and I choose to believe he meant them. What I know is that somewhere 2 states away, there's a little girl with my son's eyes who draws pictures of me with the wrong color hair and the right nose, and she is the clearest thing in any of this. I got back in the car, merged back onto the highway. The night was clear and the road was mostly empty, and I had 300 miles to think about all of it. I did it for my son once. My hip still aches, but I'd drive it again.